Watch out, let me get a shot. Where they at? Where they at?
On that rooftop. Hey! Give me a fucking 42 in here,
We're east of the riverbed, and we're taking fire from the west. Roger, stand by, we're popping smoke. Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
On today's podcast, we are honored to have Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, U.S. Army retired. Dave is a prior served as sergeant and paratrooper, and he subsequently served as an airborne and ranger qualified infantry officer with a total of over 23 years experience in leading soldiers worldwide. During his Army career, he was also a professor of psychology at West Point. Dave retired from the Army in February 1998 and has devoted himself to teaching, writing, speaking, and research. He is an internationally recognized scholar and speaker, and is the author of a dozen books, including the bestsellers On Killing and On Combat. These books deal with the psychological effects of killing and war on soldiers and are considered must-reads by all professional soldiers and aspiring combat leaders. We're truly blessed to have him with us today. Colonel Grossman, welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Mike. It's my honor to be on board. And, I always try to mention up front in the podcast business, I've been on 60 Minutes in 2020 and Larry King. And the truth is, it didn't amount to a hill of beans. You got 5 minutes. You couldn't control what was being said. And a week later, nobody cared. And we really didn't have citizen journalism. Every city might have had 2 newspapers. We had 3 networks. We had maybe 20 major national public news magazines. And if you didn't get on them, you didn't get. And again, it was gone the next week. But the podcasts have just broken down the barriers. And I want to honor you for doing the podcast. I want to honor your listeners for being people who are seeking deeper knowledge. It's a really exciting times. And these words are being archived, and people 100 years from now might tap into these words and tap into this to see and understand what's happening during these incredible times. And these are amazing times. 9/11, the longest war, the international terrorist threat, the virus, the economic crash and rise, incredible times politically. And for those of you that are here in this podcast world, you're part of creating that environment of that history. So it's an honor to be on board, and especially the young leaders that this podcast is focused to. It's an honor to be of service to you.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I agree with everything you're saying. As you know, the intent of the podcast is for the young folks, aspiring combat leaders, including some who aren't even in the military yet, and aligning with what you just said, including some that probably aren't even born yet. I don't know what the internet's going to look like 50 years from now, but whatever it is, these podcasts, once published, will be out there. And so I just hope to leave a trail of great interviews with, been there, done that, highly accomplished guys, subject matter experts, and you're certainly one of them. And I thank you for sharing. I think it's going to be a great podcast. I think the younger folks are really going to have their eyes open by some of the comments you're about to make. So with that, I'd like to start, one of the questions I ask every interviewer, everybody I interview, Dave, is most young warriors spend a lot of time pondering the eternal question, I haven't been to combat. And if I go, when I get there, will I be okay? I'm not really necessarily afraid of dying. I'm afraid of letting down my buddies. I'm afraid of not performing well. And, everybody so far, in my experience, has been, people revert to their training and 99.9% of people are going to do well. What I think the military does not do a good job, and I know what I was totally unprepared for, I gave no thought whatsoever to the question, well, once I get there and perform, how will that affect me? Will it affect me? I didn't know what I didn't know. And I've talked to a lot of combat veterans, and it's that they gave absolutely zero thought or consideration to, assuming I go, I do it, and I take life, see lives taken, see wounded, see horrific things, smell horrific things, hear bad sounds. How is that going to affect me? And I know so much of your research is, covers this topic. So I really would like to hear your thoughts, and please take license to go wherever you want to go. These are young Lance Corporals, ROTC students, second lieutenants, future combat leaders who, until I mentioned this, probably, like me, hadn't given a second thought about the effects of combat and killing.
Well, let me lay a foundation for my own journey, seeking that same answer. I enlisted in 1974, 82nd Airborne Division, and we had Vietnam vets all around us. And we wanted to get them to tell us what combat would be like. And they wouldn't say. I mean, it really was like this body of knowledge, this taboo topic that we couldn't get info on. And so, years later, I'm a young infantry captain, a ranger, and a paratrooper, headed off to teach at West Point. And I thought, I'm going to examine the subject of killing. And I thought what was at the core of combat was the act of killing. And I wrote my book on killing. 500,000 copies sold worldwide, translated to 8 languages, great honor of my life, Marine Corps Commandant's required reading list. But then I retired, like you, almost exactly the same, terminal leave in 97, began speaking in 98. And I was teaching law enforcement, cops, feds. And prior to the war, the only ones in combat were law enforcement. And it really was, I call it the ultimate acid test. Peacetime military is like a football team that never plays a game. And you never really know what it's going to be like. Yeah. But the ones who were getting the acid test every day was law enforcement. And my concept completely evolved from on killing, which really is academically useful. But for those who prepare themselves, killing is just not that big a deal. As I peeled away the layers of the onion, what was really important is what was on combat. How in the hell could we have had 500 freaking years of gunpowder combat and not let people know the shots will probably get muted in combat? Tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, slow motion time. I have had hundreds of people tell me they can see the bullet in combat, and I believe them. It's like airsoft or paintball. It's slow for you to track your eyes. On several occasions, they walked up and point where the bullet hit, know where they could have done that. They weren't track their eyes like they said they were. Half of all trained seasoned cops have memory gaps, blackouts. About 1 out of 5 the trained seasoned cops in a gunfight have memory distortions. They just flat remembered something that did not happen. And so knowing about these things ahead of time was terribly important. There's the core of it. But then even more important is what happens afterwards. And you're right, modern training, you'll do the right thing. Boom, bah, it's going to be done. But what we got to do is turn that training into inoculation as best we can. And so we've got force-on-force engagements, we got simunition, airsoft, paintball. Those things are really effective. There's an owie on the other end when you lose. When I was in the 82nd, they would all wear face masks, and we had BB guns, and it was a big thing. And we're watching each other. It was great training. Then they did this laser integrated stuff, and that was kiddie stuff. All right, the big guys like that. We could see the integration. There's no feedback loop. We liked our BB guns. We liked whacking those guys with the BB. The 4 or 5 of us would hammer this guy with BB guns, and he scrambled for cover, and that's real stuff. Well, now we have simunition, like I said, and various, that's a brand name. There's other brands doing a great job where there's an owie, and there's feedback loop. And this is called reality-based training, RBT. And this reality-based training is the greatest revolution on the battlefield since the invention of gunpowder. And that's the acid test that we want to get ahead of time. And you shot, and we don't let you die. You don't give you permission to die, but you get to come back and do it again and again and again. The video games are good, but that feedback loop is what makes it work. But while you do reality-based training, and I'm deadly serious, do this right, don't get all goofy here, but somebody take a dump in a pan, and the smell of shit and the smell of vomit and the smell of piss. When you rip open a human body, what's the smell like? Blood, piss, vomit, shit. And those are the smells of combat and the smell of gunpowder. And so we encounter that in a controlled environment in training. And we make it as realistic as we can. And then you experience that stuff in combat. And really the heart of the matter is you kind of expect crazy things in combat. When crazy things happen after combat, it can scare the daylights out of you unless you've been warned. So what happens is that the body is in a sympathetic nervous system arousal. Fight or flight mechanisms are kicking in. And then there's a crash afterwards. And we have rest and digest. So very often people gorge themselves after a stressful event, a life and death event. And you go on this roller coaster, fight or flight and rest and digest. And it's a life and death event, and that adrenaline was pumping and your body goes in survival mode. A week later, a starter's gun goes off in your daughter's swim meet, and suddenly your heart is pounding, you go on that roller coaster ride again. That is not PTSD. It's normal. The way you deal with it will decide whether or not it becomes PTSD. Use your breathing. You know, I've got hundreds of case studies that people have mailed in, emailed in, and organized by topic. And of all the topics, the breathing in on combat has received the most feedback, has had the most dynamic. And what we do is we're up in the sympathetic nervous system arousal, and we gain control with the breathing. But we found a better technique is to take a swig of water. And so that swig of water is a nice way to get people to breathe. It takes you from fight or flight to rest and digest. You know, when you see food, you salivate. When you're scared, you get dry mouth. The opposite of salivation is dry mouth. It's a natural thing in combat. You know, in a sizable portion of people, a minority, but maybe 1 out of 5 of the troops in World War II would admit that they mess themselves in combat. About half would admit they wet themselves in combat. One old World War II vet said, all that proves is all the other guys were damn liars. Yeah? So we're not saying everybody messes themselves, but that's normal. You're in this adrenaline state, you dump the unnecessary dynamic, you dump that toxic waste. The colon goes from this big balloon full of shit to an empty balloon. All that toxic waste gets wiped out. It's all reasonable. It's all survival stuff. But we need to be warned and told it's okay. I got a case study in non-combat. You know, the young private is in, I think it was like Sicily, under fire, and he's just first combat, and the old sergeant's there, and they're under fire, and they're hammering the bad guys. And sergeant says, oh, damn. And the private said, what? Yeah, I just wet myself. I always do that in combat. It's no big deal. The private said, Sarge, I wet myself too. He said, welcome to combat. You know, so there's things happening that people might not necessarily talk about. Modern stress inoculation will reduce the probability of those responses. But they're okay. That's how the body responds. You need to know. And that swig of water, you know, what we do is we do our critical incident stress management. We do our debriefing. And all it is an AAR, an after-action review. But now everybody has a bottle of water in front of them. And they talk about what happened. They fill in the memory gaps, so sort out the memory distortions. They learn the tactical lessons. We know the majority of the learning in a training exercise happens afterwards in the AR. How much more so do we want to capture that information in a real-world event? But everybody has a bottle of water in front of them. And the moment they start to become emotional, they stop, take a swig of water, regain control, and keep going. And so we forewarn and forearm people about what's going to happen. But let me lay a foundation of something really important here. The vast majority are going to come out of combat stronger. A new greatest generation is rising up. Now, you may have heard 22 veterans a day take their life. But the word veteran means anybody who served in the armed forces. Veteran and combat veteran, two different things. And in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, right up until the early 70s, just before you and I graduated from high school, they drafted everybody. Elvis Presley was drafted. Elvis was a veteran. Most of those 22 veterans a day are 70, 80, 90-year-old men. And one suicide is one too many, and every suicide is a tragedy. But they want you to think that all of our veterans are suicidal, and it's a result of the war. And of those 22 a day, only 1 or 2 are from the current war, and one's one too many. But the critical component in our suicide is sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation creates impaired judgment. In the active duty military, we track every suicide intensely. And our suicides have nothing to do with combat. A non-combat vet is likely to take life as a combat vet. But a sleep-deprived soldier can be up to 5 times more likely to take their life. And when we look at motorcycle accidents, traffic accidents, suicides, it keeps coming back to the one preventable dynamic is sleep management. And so the young soldier, the young NCO, the young corporal, the young lieutenant, if you really want to take care of yourself and take care of your troops, we found that your body is the baseline. We get enough food, but we don't make ourselves get enough sleep. It's a biological blind spot. Your body doesn't know how to make you get enough sleep. It always happened naturally. It got dark every night. There was nothing to do, and we went to sleep. But now we've got lights and television and video games. And suddenly we got things that make us go 24/7. The body doesn't know how to make us get enough sleep. So understand that there's something you can control right now, you and your troops, is sleep. And a sergeant major told me, he said, you know, the unit deployed, and we're in a semi-barracks combat environment. And I told the troops, it's lights out every night, just like a pro ball team, it's lights out. He said, after 10 o'clock, I'm walking through the barracks. If you're playing video games, going to take your video games. You got fair warning right now. He said, a week later, I got a closet full of video games. These are good troops. They won't disobey an order, but they can't not play those damn games. They're up all night long, and then they hit the ground. And sleep deprivation creates impaired judgment, like being drunk. 24 hours without sleep, your impaired judgment equal to 0.10 above legally drunk. If somebody showed up morning formation drunk, you'd kick his ass. If he shows up morning formation sleep deprived because he played video games all night long, he needs his ass kicked. And these are the things that we're beginning to learn in all these years of war, that the critical ingredient is sleep deprivation. It is also a critical ingredient in PTSD. If you're sleep deprived, you're far more likely to have this negative response to combat. But let's talk about PTSD. The best data we have coming out of the war tells us that 5% of the troops contract PTSD. The best study we have, and then another major study, both came up almost the exact same data. 16% of the troops who deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan have PTSD. 11% of the ones who didn't deploy have PTSD. About 1 out of 10 of the population, you push the right button, pretty good chance you get a post-traumatic response. But take 16%, subtract 11% of those who already had it, and 5% contract PTSD. The British studied their troops in Afghanistan, 5%. The Dutch studied their troops in Afghanistan, 5%. You know, I present at national, international site conferences, and there's always some Brit that comes up and says, well, you know, the British troops are in a 5% PTSD. Why are the Americans so much higher? They're not. There is this myth that they're all suicidal and homicidal and PTSD-riddled nutcases, where the truth is just the opposite. The Vietnam veteran was spit on and called baby killer. It really did happen. I talk about it in On Killing. Well, they aren't spitting on these veterans. They're victims. They're damaged goods. They're suicidal, homicidal, PTSD-riddled nutcases and victims of an evil war, and they're all destroyed. The senator from California said, all veterans are insane and never be trusted. U.S. Senator must know what she's talking about. All veterans are damaged goods. No, they're not. It is anti-war propaganda. The Vietnam veteran called baby killers were spit on. Now they're victims of an evil war. They're not. They're a new greatest generation that's rising up. But the other thing to understand, we're dang good at treating PTSD. We get better every day. For that small percent that do contract it, we're darn good at treating it. I tell the story of Marcus Luttrell, lone survivor. Most of you have seen the movie, maybe read the book. Navy SEAL, his entire team's wiped out. He's captured, he's tortured, very bad things happened. I trained Marcus Luttrell's unit before and after that incident. Now, I'd never been able to talk about him, but I was on his podcast a while back and got his permission to talk about him. So I'm going to talk about it. I trained Marcus Luttrell's unit before and after the incident. And I tell people, post-traumatic stress is like being overweight. Post-traumatic stress disorder is like being obese. It's debilitating. We all know the difference between a few pounds overweight and obese. Post-traumatic stress is overweight. Post-traumatic stress disorder is obese. It's debilitating. And I trained Marcus Luttrell's unit before and after the incident. And his doc told me that Marcus came back from that incident and was 500 pounds PTSD, totally debilitated. A year later, he was 50 pounds PTSD. He wanted to deploy again with his unit, and he did, and it was a good thing. I told him at the time, look how far you've come in just the last year. Have confidence. You can come farther. Anytime you tell me, look at the progress you've made so far, have confidence you make more progress. Today, Marcus Luttrell tells us he is 100% post-traumatic stress-free. It took years. It wasn't easy. But if he can come back the other side, anybody can. So get all of that garbage out of the way. They're all suicidal. They all have PTSD. No, they're not. I keep running to veterans who think there's something wrong with them because there's nothing wrong with them. A new greatest generation are rising up. My most recent book, just came out last week, is on spiritual combat. And in the end, faith is part of the component that can sustain us in battle and after battle. But I talk about great warriors throughout history. The greatest generation in America were products of 4 years of war. Napoleon's old guard, at the most, were product of 11 years of war. What kind of magnificent warriors, what kind of magnificent men and women are going to come out of 2 decades of war? This is truly a greatest generation rising to the challenge. Go into combat, believe it'll make you stronger. If there's a problem, deal with it, and have faith that help can help. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts in combat, you need to understand at the moment of truth, what motivates people is their comrades. Men don't die for patriotism, for honor, for glory. They die for their buddies. They don't want to let down their friends. That is a fundamental foundation. But afterwards, those things become very important. The honor of the Corps, patriotism, protecting our nation. These are things that help you sustain it over the long haul. Don't get ate up with cynicism. In the heat of battle, there's just you and your comrades, but you can become cynical and reject all those other things that are so terribly important to help us sustain ourselves. The honor of the Corps, to protect our nation. That's why we joined the armed forces, and it sustains us afterwards. In the heat of battle, everything comes down to you and your comrades. But afterwards, you zoom back out again, and you need that big picture to sustain yourself over the long haul. And our war, you and I, Mike, it was a Cold War. The Russians never came across the border. We won that war by not having to fight. They were deterred. The price of war is too high. Our current enemy cannot be deterred. They can only be hunted around the planet like a bunch of freaking whack-a-moles and hammer them before they come and kill our children. Our armed forces today truly are a human shield of flesh and blood that stands between evil and our children. I tell you, around the world, when I teach my classes, I talk about 600 times a year in Afghanistan, they attacked schools, their own kids in their own school, in their own nation. I talk about daycare massacres and school massacres committed by Boko Haram across Northern Africa by the thousands. When they really want to hurt you, they don't pee in your water, they don't sprinkle doo-doo over your skies, they come kill your kids. And we are fighting to protect all that's innocent and good and true against evil. How can you call it anything other than evil? The people we're facing, the people we're fighting. You've got to believe that your sacrifice is for a noble and worthy purpose. The foundation of resiliency is motivation. When you chose to be a warrior, you chose a life of sacrifice. You're never going to be stinking filthy rich, at least not legally. You're never going to be famous. Chesty Puller, we all dream of that kind of thing, but odds are very, very long it's never going to happen. When you chose to join the armed forces, you chose a life of sacrifice. And you must believe your sacrifice is for a noble and worthy purpose. And how desperately the world needs what you have to give. So I kind of shoehorn that and bookend that with myself. I'm 63 years old, almost exactly the same age as you. We're just a month away. And I've been on the road for the last 23 years. truly over 200 nights a year, sometimes approaching 300 days a year on the road. Training military and all 50 states, law enforcement, every federal agency. Waiting at home for me is my bride of 44 years, my high school sweetheart. She was 15 when I proposed to her. I was 17. I tell people we are from Arkansas. 2 years later, she married a crazy Army paratrooper and has been this ride with me for 44 years. I love her more than life itself. I get home one, maybe 2 nights a week. A conjugal visit, clean underwear, back on the road. You see, the only thing on earth more precious than my bride are my grandchildren. And we believe if we love our children, if we love our God, if we love our nation, if we love our grandchildren, we'll walk out that door and give 100%. It is my prayer that I can keep doing what I do for another 20 years. Every day that I have health, every day that somebody wants to hear got a gift, I'm going to walk out that door and do it. And the crazy thing is we're talking about love. And the crazy thing about love is the love of our nation, the love of our comrades, the love of our family, of our nation, of our God, of our way of life. The crazy thing about love is the worse it gets, the more determined you are to give it all you got. And sometimes the greatest love is not to sacrifice your life, but to live a life of sacrifice. To place the welfare of others ahead of your own. To walk out the door every day of your life. To do a dirty, dangerous, desperate, thankless job. To the utmost of your ability every day of your life, because you know if nobody did it, our civilization would no longer exist. Not to sacrifice your life, but to live a life of sacrifice. Dervaux says therein lies the greatest life.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense from a old soldier and an old Marine, an old Ranger, and does that all make sense?
Yes, makes perfect sense. Dave, what about, you mentioned resilience. I would like to ask your thoughts. I know a logical next question that young troops would have is, I'm hearing you, Dave. I believe everything you're saying. Talk a little bit more about this thing called resilience and how can I develop it in myself and my troops?
All right. The first step in resiliency truly is motivation. You got to believe your sacrifice for a noble and worthy purpose. Cynicism will destroy you. Cynicism will eat you alive. You got to truly believe in these things, and that will sustain you. And the next step in resiliency is motivation turned into action. Identify the things you can do and do them. And when you take a look at things, there are many things in this world you cannot control. And you got to let go of those things. At the global level, the national level, what other people are doing, you cannot control that. The only thing in the universe you can control is yourself right now. Can we agree on that? Nothing you can control except yourself right now. And if we give way to cynicism, if we give way to bitterness or complacency or denial, that's the one thing we can control. And you've given the world a victory with your own hand. And I tell you, the honor of the Corps, the honor of the armed forces, of the Army, of your unit, the dynamics of patriotism, and the fact that our nation is the best nation we've got out there. And we're trying to be better, and we are a global force for good, and we are truly a human shield between evil and those who come and harm our children. And so there's only one thing in the universe you can control. All that other stuff, let go of it. And that's where faith comes in. It really is good if you have a higher power to turn things over. People say there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, actually there are. And that's okay, but it was Plato that said it first. He said, few men are so entrenched in their atheism, they don't turn to higher power in a moment of life and death. And being able to have a higher power to turn things over to, that's pretty important. And so my most recent book on spiritual combat, and the book just before that is called A Bulletproof Marriage, 90-day devotional. It's just sheepdog and spouse. Sheepdog's everybody who know there's evil in the land and are dedicated to protecting. First responders, military, police, they're all sheepdogs. And you can use this faith to leverage your relationship with your spouse. And one of the most important dynamics you will ever have is that management of your family, of your spouse, of finding that middle ground, of sustaining that across the years. And the last two books of mine have really been dedicated to that. Bulletproof Marriage, a 90-day devotional, is focused on 5 minutes a day, sheepdog and spouse. And then the most recent one is on spiritual combat. Just came out last week and already taken off and doing some amazing things. As we continue with resiliency, the next step in resiliency is realistic training, stress inoculation. That's that reality-based force-on-force training. Remember, don't get goofy or carried away, but the smells of the battlefield are really one of the things that we miss. And smell is a primal sense. The smell of gunpowder, shit, vomit, piss, the things that are inside living creatures. Having a little of that there is something to think about, kind of push that envelope. You do it in a wise way, don't get goofy. But these are things we can be thinking about. But then, when we take it the next step, is to be forearmed and forewarned about what's going to happen in combat. Tunnel vision, auditory exclusion. By the way, the shots were muted, you are still getting hearing loss. And you need to wear hearing protection. Or be a deaf old geezer like me, and it's a pain in the butt. And memory gaps and memory distortions. And if you know those memory gaps and memory distortions there, you sit around, everybody got a canteen in front of them, everybody talk about what just happened. You fill in the memory gaps, you sort out the memory distortions. You learn the tactical lessons, but every time somebody starts to become emotional, we stop, take a swig of water, and from the very beginning, separate the memory from the emotions. And that's kind of the key to preventing PTSD. Remember, going on that roller coaster ride is not PTSD, it's normal. It's how you respond to that will decide whether or not it becomes PTSD. A Vietnam veteran told me one time, he said, I came back from Vietnam, I was in a horrendous firefight, and a week later I'm home with my family, and it's 4th of July, and a firecracker goes off, and boom, I hit the dirt. I look up, and there's my dad, a World War II vet. He laughed and said, that's normal. It'll go away in a little while. He said, man, it's so important to have those World War II vets to tell us, hey, that's normal. Well, we don't have, we had a long dry spell without any wars. The Vietnam vets are getting pretty old. The World War II vets are almost all gone. And we need to know these things, and we need to know these things are normal. And use that breathing, regain control. And I'll give you an example. A young soldier told me he's with his little 3-year-old boy. A car backfires, boom, he hits the dirt. He said, looks up, and here's a little 3-year-old boy. Look where the eyes that big. He said, got up my knees, put my hand on the little boy's shoulder. I said, those are called combat reflexes. Kept dead alive in combat. It'll take a while for that to go away. He said, for the next month, any loud noise, boom, the kid's hitting the dirt. All neighbor kids, boom, they're all hitting the dirt. And he said, we laugh about it. It's so healthy to be able to laugh about it. Laughter is a powerful way of saying this has no power over me. He said, if we hadn't been warned about those things, we wouldn't be laughing. So be forewarned of what happens in the event and after the event. And remember, those things that will sustain you, your comrades who died, your sacrifice. In the heat of battle, we die for each other, we fight, and we put our lives on the line for each other. But afterwards, those higher causes, those things that brought you in are the things that will sustain you afterwards. You honor the flag, you honor the Corps, you honor the Army, you honor your institutions, you honor patriotism, and those are truly the values that will sustain you in the years afterwards. You be that old veteran that walks out the door every day and has a flagpole in his yard and raises that flag every day. And those are the things that sustain us. It doesn't have to be that, but some version thereof. And know that you're sacrificed for a noble and worthy purpose. That kind of ties it all together as far as resiliency from beginning to end. Again, does that all make sense, Mike?
It makes perfect sense. And one of the things that it leads me to, Dave, that I'd like to talk about is I'd like to hear your thoughts. If troops are engaged in any kind of serious combat, they're going to cause and experience casualties.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear what you can say to help these young men and women prepare for seeing friendly casualties, seeing enemy casualties, seeing civilians that were inadvertently killed or purposely killed by the enemy.
To a certain degree, remember this now. You see civilians that are killed, you see children that are killed. There is no army on the face of the planet, there is no armed forces on the face of the planet who has done more to protect innocents than we're doing now. In World War II, we bombed entire cities. We exterminated, we nuked cities, and we firebombed cities. Men, women, and children. And it wasn't the front lines. Most of the men were gone. It was mostly women and children, elderly, being killed by the tens of thousands in order to win this war. And that was a necessary thing in its time. But if you think we might be troubled about this one child or this one incident, once again, there's great value in understanding that we are truly a global force for good, that we are truly, more than any army and armed forces in the history of the world, dedicated to protecting the innocent. We limit where our artillery goes, we limit our airstrikes, we limit our fire to precision, taking out the bad guy. If in the process of defending our loved ones and defending our nation, some of these things happen, we've got to recognize that that's part of the price of war. It is far, far less than it's ever been in history, and we've got to be, those in the past have dealt with it, and we can deal with it. But one of the other dynamics is survivor guilt, when you lose your comrades. And the key thing to understand here, survivor guilt is not PTSD. It's grieving, it's loss, it's normal, but it's hard. In the normal cycle of life, we will all bury our parents. Anything more normal, that parents that die before their children, is normal, but it's hard. As most people's lives, one of the hardest things you'll ever do is to bury your parents. Does that destroy us? No, I think we're a little bit wiser people when we bury our parents and we understand how precious every minute can be and how precious every life can be. But our parents want us to be destroyed by that? No. And in these violent times, is there anything more normal that some of our comrades would lay their life down for us and for our higher cause? Does that destroy us? No, we will not give the enemy another victory. We will not give the foe another victory by letting their death destroy us. Would they want us to be destroyed? No. And ask yourself this question right now. If you were the one that died, and your loved ones and your comrades are driving on, you're dead. Everybody you have to care about is getting on with life. What do you want for them after you're gone? What do you want for your loved ones, your comrades after you're gone? Happiness and joy. The fullest, richest, best life they can have. That's what you lived and fought and died to give them. Now they're the one that died. You're driving on. What do they want for you? The same thing. The fullest, richest, best life you can have. That's what they lived and fought and died to give us. And that means right now, you make that decision. I will not be destroyed by the death of my comrades. I will not give the enemy another victory. I will not waste the life that was bought at such a price. And you dedicate yourself to crack the bones and suck the marrow of every day you've been blessed with, to live that full, rich life that was bought at such a price.
Very good thought process. I sat here kind of rapt just listening to you. I never thought before, Dave, about the thought about parents. You know, we do expect our parents to die before us, and painful as it is, we drive on. And I think people can take comfort in your words about, you know, if it was you that died, what would you want your buddies to do? And so if it's your buddies that passed, then they would want you to have joy and happiness. So
Amen.
Very, very profound. I want to go in a bit of a different direction now. You've talked about sleep deprivation, and you've talked about, certain aspects of the physicality and all that. Certainly, you've talked much about the mental aspect, psychological aspect. I want to get your thoughts on physical preparation, physical training. As you know, peacetime leaders can sometimes go bonkers a little bit off the deep end on peacetime PT. And to where you'll only be good in combat if you run marathons or you can do 65 dead hang pull-ups and all that.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on realism and what benefit, if for the any young doubters out there about what's the big deal? I mean, I'm in a motorized infantry unit or I'm a Navy unit. What's the big deal about physical ability? What does physical training and readiness add to the value, the combat effectiveness and combat endurance for that 6 or 9 month of deployment?
General Patton said, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." He included himself. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. We're all human. We all have a limit to our endurance. We slam into that limit, then it can be the limiting factor that prevents you from doing what you can. Yeah, we don't have to be all marathon runners, but S.L.A. Marshall was one of the greatest masters of the reality of battle in his books and his studies in World War II, in Korea. And Marshall said the greatest preparation for war is road marches. Just putting a ruck on and going all day long, sleeping and doing again and again and again. The monotony, the pain, the sustainment. He said that is the single greatest, not running necessarily a marathon, but those long ruck marches and that sustainment dynamic that we need. The experts will tell us it's part of it, but I'll tell you something, we're all going to grow old and we'll probably put on some weight. So, my hobby is shooting, and I've got a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, the martial art of the firearm. And I grew up in the martial arts. I love the martial arts. But, I'm too old to take an ass kicking. I go straight to the gun. And I'm never without a gun on me. And I'm so glad I live in a nation where I have that option. And I'm really good with it. We get old and we get fat, but we can still be one hell of a shot. And but hang on to that physical fitness as long as you can. Sustain it as long and hard as you can, because it truly is a critical part of the equation. And we can go too far, and we can burn up training time and resources. But Patton nailed it. S.L.A. Marshall nailed it. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. We all have a wall that we will slam into. The goal is to push that envelope. And I'll tell you something else, and this is important. I'm a graduate of Army Ranger School. We went days without food and days without sleep. It was the single hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But from that point on, we can always say, well, at least I got a full stomach. At least I got a good night's sleep last night. And nothing else will ever look as hard. And I'll tell you, there were times in Ranger School, we've gone days without food, days without sleep. You got a ruck on your back. You're on a combat patrol. It's absolutely dark. There's nothing in the universe except the ranger eyes of the two little luminous tabs on the back of the head of the guy in front of you. And you say, I can't go one more step. This is where I give up. Now, one more step, one more step, one more step. And suddenly you're over the hill and you say, oh, maybe the next hill. There's a saying that courage is hanging on for one more second. And the thing about Ranger School didn't teach me I can go without sleep. Ranger School didn't teach me I can go without food. We all need sleep. We all need food. What it told me, though, is if there's this little monkey brain, the little dog brain inside all of us. If you've never been without food, you've never been without sleep, and suddenly you encounter it, that monkey brain will panic. Oh, no food, no sleep. Oh, no, I've never been here before. And the goal is, in training, to encounter sleep deprivation, to encounter food deprivation. So when the real thing happens, it's I've been here before. And the little monkey brain doesn't panic. Okay, we've been here before. We can handle this. You cannot teach your body to get by on less sleep. You cannot teach your body to get by on less food. But you can teach your mind to deal with the stress of that. Now, I had the honor to do some work with NCO training at Quantico a while back in the Marines there. And the battalion commander was telling me, he said, look, we push our Marines in training. But if they're going to be in the range the next day, we make absolutely certain they get a good night's sleep the night before. Now that's leadership. Do you understand? In a controlled training environment, we go without food, we go without sleep, in order to have ourselves mentally prepared for that stressor. But when it's a real world situation, our lives are on the line, for troops to be unfed, for troops to be sleep deprived, is a leadership failure. In the heat of battle, things come apart. Leadership can fail, but training prepares for that. And I think, training to be miserable, there really is a place for that. And remember, you will pay a price for no food. You will pay a price for no sleep. In a controlled training environment, it's okay. You're going to be behind the wheel of a vehicle. You're going to be flying a helicopter. You're going to be on the range. It's going to be a real-world tactical operation. You make absolutely certain you get a good night's sleep the night before, and the troops get a good hot meal every time we can possibly do it. You understand that dynamic of training to be miserable, of the value of that road march when just one more step is all you can possibly do. And then when you encounter that again, you've been there. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. And so we push that envelope as far as we can, knowing that every human being has a limit. And sooner or later, we might all hit that limit, and we're all human. But we push that envelope as hard and fast as we can. As we get older, it gets a little harder, but we still do the best we can to push that envelope and sustain ourselves over the long haul. And that business of sustaining over the long haul, something I mentioned it early, Mike, when you and I were talking before this podcast. I was just talking with my stockbroker there. We were talking about the crazy, where can you invest money in these times? Where's the future going to be? And I told him, I know one thing for damn sure. The one thing that's going to come out of this whole coronavirus quarantine and the economic crash and all this other stuff is we will have a whole lot more of what people call preppers. And I use that word in a positive way. People begin to understand the government will not always be able to protect me. I need to accept responsibility for protecting myself and my loved ones. The government will not always have food at the supermarket. There's a meat shortage, and there's going to be a worse one coming down the road. Hunting has exploded. I've got a book coming out in the next 6 months to a year called On Hunting, and it truly is the definitive book, just like On Combat and On Killing. It's a definitive book on the subject. And this is a growth industry. And what this means to all of you warriors, all you sheepdogs out there, that the world desperately needs what you have to give. Fieldcraft skills, marksmanship skills, hunting skills, all of the skills that you have. This is a growth industry. I teach at the NRA every year. I'm one of their most popular breakout speakers. And that dynamic of people seeking that information and seeking that knowledge and seeking that training, even if it just means that you go out and you retire honorably, or you get out of the military honorably and you sit behind a desk for the rest of your life, good for you. Somebody's got to do that job. But somewhere in your heart, you have a set of skills and a set of abilities you can lead on to the moment of truth. And if you find the opportunity to use those skills to train others and to prepare others, in the end, there's great value in making that transition from the warrior to the wise old man, from the warrior to the sensei. And there's a lot of things going to be coming up in the near future. I think Hojitsu, the martial art of the firearm, the idea of striving for that next belt. Of course, the Marine Corps martial arts program is brilliant, striving for that next belt. But the idea of integrating that into pistol training and pistol craft and rifle craft down the road, it's a growth industry is the point. And the world needs what you have to give. All of you young sheepdog warriors, even if you never get a chance to do that year-long, operation in battle in Afghanistan, even if that is not what's coming to you. Mike and I, our war was a Cold War, It was Beirut for a little while, and I was in Panama for a little while. None of them added up to a hill of beans. You kids today might see more combat in a week than we would have seen in our entire career. But on the other hand, maybe you won't. And that's okay too. You man the ramparts honorably and well. You have a set of skills that you can communicate and pass on to others, and you believe in who you are. And when you're bouncing your grandbaby and your great-grandbaby on your knee, and they say, "Daddy, what'd you do during those violent times?" You don't have to say, "Well, I hung back and didn't do anything." You can say, "I served honorably. I served my nation with honor and courage, and I manned the ramparts in our dark and desperate hour. And I would be so proud of you if you would decide to do the same thing in the years to come."
Well, I think you're exactly right. And one thing I wanted to follow up on was I loved SLA Marshall. I had read that as well, as far as the the forced marching, the road marching. And I think anyone that's ever done it, I know one thing, Dave, I'd rather run 10 miles than ruck 10 miles.
Amen, amen, amen.
There's no comparison between the psychological pain
Yes.
of having to put one foot in front of the other, drinking hot plastic tainted canteen water, and it's you got to have done it, But I think the message to young leaders is it's easy to rationalize why we're not going to do that. We're not going to, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, Dave. I think that road marching under various modes, but you got to be conditioned for it. But a logical progression, I think it is an extremely valuable training tool.
Yep.
And my thought is the vast majority, I think, of the training benefit is in those 6 inches above your nose. Your brain. It's everybody thinks it's tough physically. It's going to kick your ass. You're going to get blisters and all that, but the psychological, the mental toughness that can come from road marching, I think is, it's short of actual combat. I think it's second to none.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to say that. When I was a kid, I did a lot of hiking. I always had a pack. I was always going. And I grew up with visions of the military. All I ever wanted to do was, be in the military. And so, you and I know that when you're in a battalion, when you're in a company, even as a company commander, there's very few things that you're the best at. When you get a battalion of 500 folks, a company of 150, there's somebody that can shoot better, run better. There's somebody that can beat you at just about anything. As a commander, if there's something you can do the best, that's kind of a neat thing. And for me, it was rucksack road marches. In the Army, we have EIB road marches. It's a 12-mile road march with full equipment as part of the expert infantry badge. And I ran everyone. I ran for 12 miles. I ran everyone I ever could. And only once in all the years anybody ever beat me. It was an infantry officer basic. Some guy came out of college with some incredible athlete. But I always told people, I said, man, I can outrun you. I can out this you and out that you. How come you just leave me in the dirt in these road marches? And I really think it's about being able to endure pain, to be able to just suck up in pain. And I know this guy's got better wind than me, and he's got better than muscle mass than me, and yet I can leave him in the dirt in that rucksack road march because it's just about that thing that any wiry, gnarly, hard-bitten guy can do is just accept that pain and keep on doing it even when it hurts. And that comes back to that mental side of the game. Running marathons is fine, but ruck marching, as you said, is a dynamic. And what are we going to have to do in combat? Not going to run a whole lot of marathons in PT shorts and running shoes in combat. You're going to be doing an awful lot of ruck marching in combat. So develop that and understand that the key dynamic is going to be willingness to accept pain and nurture that and develop that. We get those calluses on those feet, and we stop getting those blisters. We get the muscles developed, and we stop getting some of those muscle aches. But still, when you push that envelope, it's going to hurt. And that sweat on the battlefield, sweat in training prevents blood on the battlefield. A gallon of sweat prevents a pint of blood every time. And that's that dynamic that great leaders have always said. And in your physical fitness, push-ups and sit-ups, that's all fine. Body, core, ability is fine. But it just keeps coming back to that ability to put that ruck on, put that equipment on, hold that rifle in your hands, and go mile after mile after mile when you're aching at every pore of your body, and yet you suck it up and go on a little further. And in the end, that's one of the greatest ingredients and components we can have. So again, we all have a wall. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. Physical training to be miserable is real. Use it intelligently. Don't burn your people out and then put them in a life and death event. In controlled training environments, we can do this. In combat, it's leadership failure. And I'll give you one more example of this you might like. Mike, you and I remember the movie A Bridge Too Far. And it was about the airborne operation in World War II. And, the 101st jumped in, and then the 82nd jumped in and grabbed these bridges, and then the bridge over the Rhine, with the British Airborne Division jumped in, and the British were caught on the drop zone and just hammered, and only one battalion ever made it to the bridge, and they hung out for days, and then they collapsed, and it was a bridge too far, and it was basically a failure. The overall operation was a failure. The bridge too far, it just required, oh, this is kind of dull. Yeah, it is pretty dull piece, but it's incredible history. Well, in that bridge too far, you see, I went to the British Staff College as a young major. Instead of going to Leavenworth, Kansas year, I'd go to England here. That was a good deal. And I was airborne, and I got it. It was the 49th anniversary of the bridge too far. And it was like 11 miles from the drop zone to the bridge. And so I landed in with second para regiment, and we jumped in with them on the drop zone, and we're road marching 11 miles, and the Dutch are on both sides of the road every step of the way applauding us, because the Dutch were so grateful to be liberated, and then to lose it. The Dutch rose up that here they are. The British have landed. They're coming to capture that bridge, and then it didn't work out. Sorry about that one, guys. We'll try better next time. But the Dutch were there beside the road, 49 years later, applauding every step of the way. An airborne jump is really amazingly demanding. The jump is demanding. You do a ruck march for 11 miles. About the 10th mile, you want to reach back through history, find the little staff puke, to put the drop zone 11 miles from the objective and slap the snot out of him.
Yeah.
But that's what it's all about. That one regiment that made it through, making that rucksack road march. And it was a leadership failure. It truly, they said, well, we can't find a good drop zone here. We'll put them out there. And it's a stupid thing to do. Accept some loss on the drop zone to get your whole division on the objective. And so in combat, when we have to do these things, the point is very often it represents a leadership failure. And we're all human. The enemy has a plan too. Plans break down. But the goal is to create an environment where we don't have to push those limits. We don't have to use those skills. When the moment comes that we do have to use them, they need to be there for us.
Yeah. Dave, our time has come to an end here. But before we go, I want to hear how people can get in touch with your books. I will say for the listeners that Dave's books on killing and on combat are very much considered classics. And I don't think you can consider yourself a professional soldier unless you have read and digested those books several times. They're also very good for professional military education sessions with your troops. And I know, Dave, you've written a host of other books, so I'd ask you to please, how do we find more of what you've done?
Well, my website is killology.com, KILLOLOGY.com. I coined the term, the scholarly study of killing, not homicide, but lawful killing, military law enforcement, the first book on killing, killology.com. But again, I found out, if you're going to just read one book, read on combat. Killing is academic, it's useful, it's important, it lays a nice foundation. But the real heart of the matter, the core of the thing was in on combat. And then as we peel away the layers of the onion, that spiritual side of the house sustains us over the long haul. My book on spiritual combat, I commend your attention if you're even interested in that dynamic and want to get a feel for it. The website, I do a lot on LinkedIn. If you want to link with me, you can do a lot more freedom than you do on Facebook. We talk about our we've got a gun business, sheepdogknifeandgun.com, doing some neat things, some amazing things. And also on Facebook, a little more limited on what we can do. But mostly it comes down to the book on combat and some of the other things on our website that we talk about. And just know this, Mike and I, we served our time. We served well. We both have the bias that coming up through the ranks is kind of a neat thing to do. But the truth is that these young warriors out there today will do more in a week as far as combat goes than we might have done in our whole career. I just want to let all you young warriors out there know we are so damn proud of you. You just make all these old geezers well up with pride and tears. This is the longest war in American history, and nobody's been drafted into this war. Nobody, 4 years into this war, there was nobody left to enlist before the war got stuck with the war. We've done this with 100% wartime volunteers. These are the best and the best we have around. For those of you that spread the envelope a little further, law enforcement and first responders out there who might listen to this podcast, you've been watching the six and covering their back over there, and nobody made you do that job. You're our nation's best out there, and you make us so proud. And we thank you for manning the ramparts with courage and honor from a couple of worn-out old geezers. God bless Semper Fi, and God bless U.S. Army. Thank you.
Well, Dave, thank you for your time, and we're blessed to have you, and we hope you come back. And again, thank you so much. I think these are going to be some very valuable nuggets of information for our listeners. Thank you. All right, Dave.
Wow.
We are rounds complete. My video locked up. I don't know if yours did.
Yeah.
Partway through, my video locked up. So.
That's the thing about Zoom, though, is it's going to capture good audio, and we should be in good shape.
Yes.
Mike, we had things in there that I haven't covered for a long time. You really brought out neat stuff. When this is ready to be posted, when this is going to be online, will you do me a favor and send me an email and let me know where I can send my social media to find it? And remind me, because I'll go on to the next battle, and remind me, if you will, please, just a sentence, that I said that as far as the nuts and bolts of military combat, this is just about the most important podcast I've ever done. And I'll say that.
I'll do that.
Thank you. And I will say that to 40,000 on Facebook and 23,000 on LinkedIn, and let them know this is, boy, I tell you, I just feel real good about this, bro. You kind of, iron sharpens iron here, and you brought out some really good points.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the invitation. I mean, I know you didn't know me from Adam, and I couldn't even show you a podcast as an example because I'm putting together season one.
Oh.
But you're the first real no shit subject matter expert that I've had on, and so I'm set a high standard right from the start. So I really appreciate your cooperation and participation on this, Dave.
Back at you, brother. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at combatleadership.com. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war.